washed dusk, he wouldn't be able to see anything for much longer. "Wonder if this has anything to do with all the fish disappearing lately," one boy muttered to his companions. "How could it?" the Gill's nephew scoffed. "Something like this would attract all the sharks from here to Britain." "Bridey," Mrs. Gill's voice cut over their muted conversation. "Have you heard a word I've said?" she sighed. "I know this is upsetting. I can only imagine what your mam will say when you have one of your night terrors after the sight of the poor lass." "I won't, I swear." I drew myself up taller and squared my shoulders as the sea breeze crashed into me. "But who do you suppose the girl is? Could she have come all the way from Ireland?" Mrs. Gill shook her head. "Certainly not. She would have made a fine supper for some hungry creature long before she reached our shores." She pulled her black shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Where are your sisters?" She looked past me as though searching for more errant girls. I clenched my hands at my sides, hiding my fists in the folds of my skirt. My sisters' whereabouts were none of the old biddy's business. Clearing my throat, I answered sweetly, "Gracie is scrubbing potatoes, Liz is hanging the wash, and Mally's out with her sweetheart, having a picnic." "Is she still sweet on Adam?" "I think so. Or Arthur. I can't exactly recall, but I'm certain his name starts with A." Mrs. Gill pursed her lips. "Your poor Da. Sometimes I wonder how he manages to keep his head in a house full of high-spirited women. He says most days it's like treading water, taking lots of deep breaths and praying for rescue." Much like I felt at that very moment, I hoped my tart reply would be enough to encourage Mrs. Gill to go pester someone else. "Marta!" Mrs. Kizak, the baker, called from a short distance away. My rescuer. She took a step forward, but paused and licked her lips. "What is it?" Mrs. Gill asked. Mrs. Kizak gestured to a few waiting neighbors, the last of the onlookers. "We were just wondering what time we'll be gathering." Of course. The town leaders would want to plan a search for the drowned girl's kin. Perhaps they'd even make funeral arrangements. Mrs. Gill nodded. "Let's meet in an hour at my place, right after supper." She looked from Mrs. Kizak back to me. "I'd best go." She heaved a long-suffering sigh. "Now I have to clean the house on top of everything else." Turning back to the churning water, I took a deep breath. My lungs filled with briny air, and the salt on my tongue made my stomach squirm. I was probably the only islander in existence who couldn't stand the grit of salt and sand in everything she owned, and who felt nauseated whenever she smelled fish. But perhaps it wasn't so strange, hating the sea's very existence when it had taken my granddad from me much too soon, just like the Gills had never quite forgiven the sea for stealing their oldest son many years ago. "Bridey?" Mrs. Gill shouted over the billowing breeze. She stood at the top of the cliff, leaning on a weathered post. "I suggest you head straight home after visiting Mr. Vundy's." An unfamiliar shadow crossed her face. "You shouldn't tarry after dusk, especially not here." I nodded and took the path at a run, legs swallowing up the distance between the cliffs and the heart of town. "Evening, Bridey," a girl called as I passed the first group of shabby wood and stone houses. Nessa Daly stood in front of her yard, clutching a handful of scraggly white and yellow flowers, wearing a smile as brilliant as the sun on water. She hadn't seen the men bearing the girl's body into town then. Keeping my word to Mrs. Gill, I didn't stop to tell Nessa about the grim scene by the cliffs. I gave her a half-hearted wave and hurried on. As I ran, I pictured Mrs. Gill's face as clearly as though she still stood in front of me, wearing that unsettling expression. I hadn't seen her so troubled since her sister passed away 5 years before, or since she'd heard my account of how Granddad died. Had the sight of the drowned girl bothered Mrs. Gill more than she cared to admit? Opening the door of our cottage, I inhaled the familiar sense of home. Hearth smoke, the earthiness of dried sage, and the metallic smell of Mam's paints. The tang of freshly skinned fish wafted